Today I'm going to answer another long question. So again, I'm going to read it directly from the screen because I can't remember all of it. I can remember the gist of it, but here it goes. What if I'm reaching new parts of myself through meditation and it is disturbing the balance of my interpersonal relationships? How do you deal with losing relationships from being more in touch? In other words, what if I have reached new consciousness and my spouse hasn't? So again, what if I'm reaching new parts of myself through meditation and it's disturbing the balance of my interpersonal relationship? How do you deal with losing relationships from being more in touch? In other words, what if I have reached new consciousness and my spouse hasn't? This is maybe one of the most difficult things about awakening, about this shift in your life, that you're used to living in a certain way, and you have a life that may be working, depending on who you are and what your life is. And as you start to awaken and you start to have a pretty deep shift in yourself, you no longer fit into what you fit into before. If your life was working for you before, it's not working in the same way anymore. And I think for me, one of the most difficult parts of awakening is not fitting into the world around you, and also not fitting into those relationships that used to feel like they were working on some level, and now they just feel like, what's going on here? As you come to a deeper experience of yourself, and you come to a clear experience of presence, when you're around people who are not living from that space and who are living in constant identification with their thoughts, everything they do is conditioned by whatever thought or impulse arises in that moment. That doesn't necessarily mean they look like a loose cannon. It doesn't mean they're extremely impulsive people necessarily, but you can perceive it's a subtle thing, but it almost looks like somebody's stuck in a small room. Like there's a movie called Being John Malkovich, which is from, I don't know, the 90s, I think. There's a part in the movie where they're on floor 3.5 or something like that, and they all have to bend over. It's a very surreal movie. But they're walking around on this floor 3.5, or I think it's 3.5, it's something and a half, and they're all bent over talking to each other. And as you come out of the I would say maybe egoic state, the state of identification with all these thoughts and feelings, and you have more space to observe, people around you start to look like they're sort of hunched down, repeating the same cycles. They're sort of stuck in a box. You see them almost from a distance, zoomed out a little bit. You feel very connected to the person behind that, but there's a sort of narrative that you're watching repeat itself that it's hard to connect to. It's like you realize that person can't meet you where you are. And the relationship becomes dissatisfying very quickly. This is also what happens in your relationship with a lot of the systems and structures around you. If you were in school and that was very satisfying, my experience is that kind of collapses. Maybe not necessarily, depending on what you're doing and whether you're passionate about it, but a lot of these structures of routine and sort of how things work, productivity, when you zoom out, it starts to look pretty weird, and you realize, I don't fit into this anymore. It could be work too. If you're in a very traditional job, you might zoom out and be like, what is going on here? And that's really not fun. The thing that is very clear is that you don't want to develop an identity against unconsciousness, against these systems, against people who aren't experiencing this inner state of presence. You don't want to start to create a worldview attached to a new thought in your head, which is, I'm this, they're that. Don't create an us and them around awakening, or you effectively start to create a cult-like mentality. That's really probably the basis of a cult, is that maybe there is some experience of awakening, but then there's a lot of identification, a lot of identity created around an us and them. We understand something that nobody else understands. We're marginalized by them. We're going to be exclusive. Then you create something very strange. So there is a natural distancing that occurs when you start to awaken, just because in presence itself, you're taking some space from your own thoughts, from your own identification with material, with your own routine, with your own emotions. And in that space, you also observe all of that thought activity of the world with a little bit of distance, with a little bit of space. You're not in it the way that a lot of people are. So there's a natural distance that occurs there, and that can be confusing. If you allow that to remain a natural distance, and you don't create an identity around it, you can observe what presence is telling you in any moment. So it's not easy, it's messy. When you're dealing with relationships and you're awakening, it's messy. You can't stick to any script anymore if you could before. There's really nowhere to hide, because you're just seeing sincerely things come up and what's happening and how things aren't working. But don't create an identity around it. Come back to presence each time and see, what is this moment asking of me? What is this aliveness? What is this presence asking of me now? And it may very well ask you to take distance. It may very well ask you to come to a new environment, to come to a new surrounding, to find a different path and connect from this space to life around you. That might mean leaving relationships. It might mean walking away from things, walking away from studies, walking away from a job. It really might mean moving to a different place in your life. But if you do it from a space of openness and never deciding in a fixed way, I have to do this is what I'm doing, but just staying open to that question, staying open to, okay, what is presence asking of me now? What's happening now? If you stay open like that, you're going to be able to respond flexibly and intelligently in the deep sense, in the emotional sense, in the intuitive sense, in the heart sense, you could say, to what's happening. So it is a very simple answer, but don't create an identity around what you're watching happening, the conflict that comes up in relationship. Just keep returning to that experience of presence. And find courage in that. Find the space in that to trust it and to move where it's directing you. It might upset your life. It will definitely upset your life in one way or another. Awakening will definitely upset your life. But it might upset your relationships. It might upset some things that you did not want it to upset. Trust it. Move into that discomfort. Take those leaps. But stay open. And maybe reconciliation will happen in ways that you could not imagine. Relationships will fall apart and actually maybe reform on a deeper level in a more natural way. So you may break up with a spouse, you may break up with a partner, and then over time, as you keep trusting this internal presence, this authenticity, you may find that same relationship come back into your life, but settled in a way that feels right. So if you were locked in a pattern before, maybe of obligation or expectation or whatever it is, and it was feeling like, this is not me, this is not natural, and you stepped away from it, but you stayed open. You didn't create an identity of, I'm never talking to you, you're not good for me, you're bad, that sort of thing. But you just stayed open. Okay, I need space right now. I need to move away from this. And you stayed open. Then there's space for that relationship to come back into your life, maybe with the sincerity of, okay, I see where this isn't working for you, and I'm not living in that anymore. But I accept you here, and this is who you are right now, and this is who I am right now. and there's a genuine relationship with a different structure. So maybe we're not so intimately connected, but I couldn't be locked here. This wasn't working for me. And now that I'm open and where I know that I'm authentic, I'm connected, I can connect to you and observe. Maybe you're not very awake right now. Maybe you're kind of missing a lot of things right now, but I don't have to be in that space with you. I can be open here and you can come in and out of my life, and there's space for that. So it takes some courage. Awakening takes courage. You keep moving into this presence and doing things that seem very irrational mentally, and you don't have any promise of how it's going to work out. So, you pack your bags and you go somewhere, and you think, what the heck am I doing? Your mind will often say, this makes no sense, because on a surface level, it often doesn't. But you feel that it's what you have to do, you know it. And you trust that and you move into it, and things do usually reform in ways that you could not possibly have planned. So trust that awakening, have that courage to move into it more deeply, and stay open on that path.